You are listening to The Grandest Tour by the Cycling Podcast. Brought to you by iwoca. Flexible loans built for small businesses. iwoca.co.uk.
Well, they're still counting the votes. Oh no, sorry, that's something else. They're still racing at the Vuelta España. My name's Richard Moore, and tonight I'm with Lionel Birnie.
Hello, Richard.
And joining us again, François Thomazeau.
Bonjour, or bonsoir, I should say.
François. Don't worry, we'll correct you on the French, François. We're back in lockdown, François. So I notice you've been treating us to a daily song on social media once again.
Yeah, unfortunately, I mean, it was kind of my lockdown routine, and I was asked by a few friends to do it again. I was a bit reluctant to do so, but no, let's face it, I like to do it. So it's got quite
maybe we'll reprise it for the podcast, because you kept us going with a weekly song, and then you did a few themed songs for our Giro coverage, maybe over the winter. Will you take requests from our listeners for songs?
Oh, sure. I mean, go ahead. Ask me songs. But keep them simple. 3 chords is good enough. But no jazz or whatever.
It occurred to me today that we only have 5 of these podcasts left of the Grandest Tour, which began all the way back in Palermo. The start of the Giro d'Italia. It will finish in Madrid on Sunday. 5 left. Lionel, what are we going to do? I don't know what I'm going to do with myself next week.
I think
I'll just be on some kind of autopilot. I'll just at 7 o'clock my time, I'll just sit in my office and talk about cycling for an hour.
Or just something else. just do a day in the life of Richard Moore. Daily podcast forever.
I couldn't stretch that to an hour, I don't think.
Well, let me take this opportunity. I was discussing that just before the pod started, but you'll be better off than Johan Alfredo. I mean, there was a terrible story in interview today in L'Equipe. Johan Alfredo is giving up. His career is finished because he's got ankle problems, and he was saying that how desperate he feels to be away from the from the World Tour and for the life of a pro cyclist. He can't sleep at night because he doesn't go training. He's not tired enough, and he's going to study to become, guess what? A journalist. Ooh.
Poor guy. Poor guy. I mean, I was already sympathetic towards him when I heard about the ankle and his struggles to adapt to life after cycling. But when I heard he was going to become a journalist, my sympathy ratcheted up a bit.
Yeah, well, a guy. I mean, probably his best result as a pro rider was to have won the Pédaleur de Charme T-shirt.
Always great value, though. And on a serious note, friend of the podcast, because he was always very, very quick to give us an interesting opinion, wasn't he, on his frustration in particular at the way that some of the riders and teams raced at the Tour de France when he finally got to ride the Tour. So. Well, I hope he finds peace in retirement, and I hope I think he'd be a good journalist. He's already been a fixture on French telly, hasn't he, during the Tour this year? We're going to talk about the Tour de France in this episode. We're going to spend the first half talking about today's stage in the Vuelta. We're stage 29 of the Grandest Tour. I have no idea what stage it is in the Vuelta, but we're going to talk about whatever stage it was today, won by Francois' favourite rider, or one of them, and then we're going to turn our attention to the route of the Tour de France. We'll hear from our diarist Nick Schultz tonight as well. But do you have the headlines, please, Lionel?
I do indeed, Richard. It's stage 14 of the Vuelta. 14 of 18.
Seems like more.
Well, yeah, but that's because you've been going for nearly 5 weeks. This is the Grandest Tour. It's not meant to be easy, is it, Richard?
Nobody said it would be easy.
Hopefully you're going to treat yourself to a lovely rest afterwards. But we'll be carrying on with weekly episodes, of course, won't we? And all our various other shows will be returning.
While it's fresh in our minds, Lionel, just say that next week we're going to do a press conference episode. We want as many questions as possible, audio files if possible. Send us your audio clip to contact@thecyclingpodcast.com. We'd love it if you could address questions to either us as a collective or individually, and that includes our whole cast of presenters. So François, Lizzie Banks, Ian Boswell, obviously Daniel as well. If you have a question for us as a team or individually, please email us, contact@thecyclingpodcast.com. That will be next week's episode.
Yeah, and we will prioritise people who send in an audio file with their question. Keep your questions succinct if you can. A total length of your introduction and question under a minute if you can, please.
Yeah.
And email them into us by the end of Sunday, really. So, yeah. Do that. Anyway, stage 14 from Lugo to Arense in Galicia, northern Spain, 204 kilometres. A pretty straightforward one, a kind of traditional transitional type stage. There was a break, and in that break there was Zdeněk Stybar of De Koning Quickstep, Tymon Adamsman of Sunweb, Dylan van Baarle of Ineos, Mike Woods of EF Education First, EF Pro Cycling, first slip up on that, I've been getting that right recently, Tim Wellens of Lotto Soudal. Now the pair of them had won stages of this Vuelta already, as had Marc Soler of Movistar, and the other rider in the break was Frenchman Pierre-Luc Perichon. Well, Perichon was consigned to French corner, I'm afraid, François, because he was dropped over the climb when Mike Woods attacked on the Alto de Abelera around 25 kilometres from the finish, and then that really set up a very exciting 3 versus 3 pursuit race with Stybar and Wellens up front, followed by Soler, who went across to them, and the other 3 chasing behind. And then they all came back together. It was a run-in that sort of reminded me of a Liège-Bastogne-Liège, really. Urban roads, quite wide, sweeping corners and roundabouts. And then they pulled off the main road. They were all together, and the punchy little climb, which was around 800 metres long, up to the finish line, sorted it all out. And Mike Woods and Tim Wellens were the 2 that went, well, shoulder to shoulder. It was really very close. It looked for a moment like Woods was going to overtake Wellens, but Wellens found an extra burst of energy just to force himself over the line and take his second stage win of the Vuelta. Behind, there was a slightly nervous run-in for the GC rider, perhaps mindful of the fact that if gaps opened, they might fall foul of the time gap rule that we saw in effect last week. But no change overall, and well, tomorrow may very well be another similar sort of stage, one for a breakaway perhaps.
You are listening to The Grandest Tour by the Cycling Podcast. Brought to you by iwoca. Flexible loans built for small businesses. Join 50,000 customers taking on life's twists and turns and scaling new heights with iwoca. If you run a business, find out more at iwoca.co.uk. iwoca.co.uk.
Let's hear again from James Turner, who works for our sponsors iwoca, about the bike ride they did from London to Brighton, which took them over the famous Ivinghoe Beacon and raised money for the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust.
It come out of sort of the strong sort of diversity and inclusion sort of work that iwoca does socially. Some of the people in the office thought it'd be a great idea to get sort of everybody together to go do a ride down to the coast. Obviously the social distancing and sort of rule of 6 made things a little bit more interesting. So it was, as usual, for a great cause, and with iwoca's sort of policy on donation matching for charitable causes, it was a great opportunity for us to make the most of the opportunity. I mean, for someone like myself, obviously the physical act of cycling to Brighton was not going to be a big taxing undertaking for me. So thinking about how I could help, again, other people, it was more about stepping up to be a ride leader for a group and enable people to get down there and try and get over Ditchley and Beacon as best they can, which maybe they wouldn't have thought about before. So we ended up with a nice little group of 6 of us. We all met up at Clapham Junction on the morning, and it was I do remember quite a chilly morning. So we were about 7 degrees. So I was wrapped up like a polar bear, with the assumption that I maybe wouldn't be working at the sort of standard work rate I would go out for a training ride on. We had a good mix of abilities, but everyone had sort of stepped up to, it was nominally known as the fast group, but in practice, most of the groups were of reasonably equal ability. The saving grace for the day was definitely having a stiff tailwind all the way down, probably about sort of 30 km/h tailwind, which really helped with progress getting down there. We had a few people start to get a little bit tired just before the end. I think the route took us about, it was 85 kilometres, and we probably finished it in sort of 3 hours 45.
As we heard from Liv Denyer in a recent episode, the ride raised around £12,000 for the charity, and iwoca have matched that too. If you want to find out about how iwoca's services can help your small business, go to iwoca.co.uk. That's iwoca.co.uk.
Well, we'll hear a bit later from Michelin Scott rider Nick Schultz, and listening to his diary tonight really emphasised to me, you call it a transitional stage, Lionel, and on paper, that's what it was. I mean, there was no real GC battle today, but he really emphasised the quality of that breakaway and how hard it was to get into it, and how fast the racing has been. And so you look at that, and all pretty established riders, but for me, Tymon Arensman, again, in a breakaway in his first Grand Tour at the age of 20, and he's yet another Sunweb prodigy, really. We saw Mark Hershey at the Tour de France, but this guy, who we heard from in our coverage at the end of the tour, because he finished second to Pogačar at the Tour de l'Avenir a couple of years ago, and he looks a great talent, and to be in that company and to make it to the finish with those guys really does underline that. But it was a brilliant win by Tim Wellens. I mean, he bridged across to that leading duo of Stybar and Soler very well indeed, and then got them. And I've seen comments from other riders and DSs about Wellens being a very honest rider. He always works hard, and sometimes too hard, but he bridged across to them and then immediately put his shoulder to the wheel, and it was quite surprising to see the groups coming back together. But he rode the finish brilliantly. He obviously knew it was narrow and twisting and that he had to be at the front. He went to the front with about 500 metres to go. Woods had a similar idea, but Wellens did really well to hold him off. And he is one of your favourites, isn't he, François?
Oh yeah, I mean, well, it's not a secret. I love Tim Wellens. He's a brilliant person, as everybody who's talked to him knows. Remember in the Tour a couple of years ago, he refused to take corticoids he could have, to cure skin problems he had, kind of allergies. And he refused to take corticoids to go ahead, and he was forced out of the Tour de France just because to stay on the clean side, which is in itself remarkable. Is always nice, always very well bred. Speaks Flemish, obviously, French and English, at will to anybody who would listen. Is always interesting to hear. I saw him win in Montreal, which is one of my favorite races, as you know, and he's got a great record. I mean, it's 30, wins, which is not bad. But I always felt he could do a little bit more. And 2 stage wins in the Giro, 2 stage wins in the Vuelta is not bad. But I think yes, with just a little extra gear, he could win a major classic. And of course, we also love his friendship with Thomas de Gent, every kind of summer.
Well, it sounds like you and de Gent are both competing for Tim Wellens.
Yeah, but you remember at the start of the it was actually when we were talking about the Giro, I kind of made fun of Wellens, because at the start of the Vuelta he went, he staged kind of a suicidal breakaway, which was totally useless, and I said, he was getting too much inspiration from de Gent there, but since then, he broke away twice and won 2 stages. So I take back my words. No, I like the guy. He's great. He's really a great man, a great rider. I mean, he's one of the prominent members of these new generations of riders who are far more polite, well-bred, nice guys than the older generation, when sometimes you had rougher type of riders. Maybe he should be a little bit rougher at times, Wellens. But as you said, But as you said, Richard, I mean, it was very important today. I mean, experience of being a Belgian rider and really cycling being his first sport, I think made the difference against Mike Woods, because he was ideally positioned. He had probably read the road book, at length to know what the finale looked like. And I think experience and the basic cycling, handling skills made the difference with Woods. Were probably the stronger guy today.
If I can just say, Rich, I think I got my words mixed up in the summary of the stage, because you're right, it was Wellens who bridged across. I think I might have said Soler bridged across. I can't remember now.
Oh, I didn't even. I wasn't even listening.
Well, people may well have been. People out there may well have been listening. I mean, some of them might have been listening. Let us know. I can't actually remember. I just when you said that, I just thought, I think I got that the wrong way around. Anyway, you're right. Wellens was impressive today, and I think we're starting to see a pattern now of what a Tim Wellens finish is, because from his 4 Grand Tour stage wins so far, 3 have been on very similar types of finish. If you remember, Rich, 2016 he got his first Grand Tour stage win at the Giro at Roccaraso, which was a bigger climb, much bigger climb than this one. But then 2 years later at the Giro, he won at Caltagirone, and it was on a similar sort of finish, sort of fast running and then a punchy little climb. And coincidentally, Mike Woods was second behind Wellens that day as well. And then just to continue the little patterns, he had his stage win earlier in this Vuelta, of course, at stage 5. Again, another Tim Wellens type finish, but Thymen Allensman was in that break that day. So a couple of little Tim Wellensy patterns have emerged there. But it's courageous what he does, really. He does pick does do a bit of a Thomas de Gent, gets in a lot of breaks, or tries to get a lot of breaks going. Even in the stages last week, he had some success getting in the breaks. He got in a break on one of the stages and then got dropped out of that break that day, perhaps thinking, well, this isn't working out the way I want it to. And Thomas de Gent's done that as well, hasn't he? He's sort of got into something not like the way it's been developing and decided to save his legs for another day. But an impressive win by Wellens, but Mike Woods did push him extremely hard.
He did. It's funny you said that the finish reminded you of Liège-Bastogne-Liège, and François, you mentioned that his record in the classics isn't great. And looking through, he's had a couple of good rides at Lombardia, 4th and 5th at Lombardia, a couple of times, but really he's not troubled the top 10 even in Liège-Bastogne-Liège or any of the other classics. Kind of strange.
Yeah. He's better in the late season. Remember, he won the Tour of Poland. He won in Montreal. He's probably a late season rider, and we're in November, so maybe
November Vuelta is perfect for him.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because it's the type. I think it's the more remarkable what he's doing. That he's not any type of rider. He's not a sprinter. He's not a stage GC contender. He could be maybe in some weak stage race, but he's not entirely. He's not a real climber, and it's even more difficult for a rider that's a good all-rounder but not exceptional anywhere to win stages. It takes guts, experience, skills, intelligence. So yeah, I like this guy.
Well, I mean, it's funny. I mean, he's in that kind of, if it were a Venn diagram, of Grand Tours, stage races and one-day races. He's kind of in the bit where he's a stage hunter, but also good in the week-long stage races, because he's won the Eneco Tour a couple of times. He won the Tour of Poland with a big break once. That was in 2016. But in the Grand Tours, he's prioritised going for these sorts of stages. He's not really a man for the high mountains. Yeah, and the other thing about Wellens, I mean, that incident where he pulled out of the Tour rather than take a corticoid to treat a skin allergy, which we gather was a reaction to the extreme sunshine. I mean, that might have something to do with his form being better in the spring and in the later part of the season. I don't know.
Yeah, in Montreal, I remember it was pouring. The rain was pouring. It was terrible. Raining all the time. And he said, he liked the rain better. So you're right. It might be an issue. He doesn't like the sun.
Just going back to Sunweb, but I don't know. Did you catch this? They've got 7 riders. Well, they've only got 6 riders left in the race now, unfortunately. But they had six of them were all in breakaways at some point today. So they were pretty determined to put someone in the break. Unfortunately, one of them, Martin Salmon, went up the road in a break, and then that was quite early on, and then got dropped and abandoned the race. He's another young rider, German rider, but I heard Mark Reif, the sports director there, saying that he just went too deep and got dropped and was out the back and abandoned. So they're down to 6 riders, but a good effort by them to get somebody in the decisive break today. Shall we hear from our diarist Nick Schultz, who sort of updates us on the last couple of days and touches on a debate we had last night about the bike change in the time trial. Lizzie Banks and I, not fans of it. Lionel loves it. He loves his gimmicks. So we asked Nick Schultz what he thought about it.
Well, we're at the end of stage 14 now. It's the home stretch. We're in the final week. The rest day and the TT done and dusted, and another super hard stage today with a ridiculous start. Same sort of situation. We had guys trying to get in the break, and at the moment that it did go, it was 7 of the strongest guys in the bunch, and to be honest, we just didn't quite have the legs at that point after burning our bickies a little bit earlier, and unfortunately missed it. And it was quite clear that with those guys in the break, it was most likely going to go to the line, so we just settled in and just sort of let the day run out and think about the coming days. Which, I think will be much of the same pattern. I think we'll see super hard starts, everyone trying to get in breakaways, really thinking about those stage opportunities, kind of like 2 separate races, a race for the stage win and then a GC race, particularly on stage 16 and 17. I think there'll be those 2 separate races, whereas tomorrow could go either way. Some of the sprinters are climbing really well. I believe it's going to be a block headwind, which means it's going to be a super long day. It's a super long stage, 230k, mostly uphill. So you're adding a block headwind to that, and we'll see what happens. I think it could go either way, but again, most likely a big breakaway will go down the road and fight for the stage win. I've been asked about what I think of bike changes in time trials. Well, first of all, I think the time trial parkour should be designed in a manner with which it's not necessary to change your bike. I just think that a time trial should be more or less flat or rolly and be able to be completed fully on a TT bike. But when they make a parkour like yesterday, it makes it almost obligatory to change your bike. I mean, this thing was a wall. It was crazy, super, super steep. I saw it and I was like, I got to change my bike. Initially, I didn't want to change my bike because I don't like the feeling of jumping off the TT bike and then straight onto the road bike because the position's so different saddle. The bike feels tiny in a way. But it was just one of those climbs where I personally felt it was going to be very difficult to get up the climb on my time trial bike. So I felt obligated to change. But I'd certainly prefer that it wasn't necessary, but maybe some guys love it. I'm not sure. But that's all from me from today, and we'll see what happens in the coming days.
Well, Richard, I'm not surprised that a rider or some of the riders would be not so keen on having to jump off their bike and jump onto another one. The transition, as Nick Schultz says there, from one type of bike to another in the sort of heat of battle is not easy, and I am sympathetic to the jumping off the bike in cleated shoes and the potential for mishaps and sort of even mild comedy if it goes wrong, and that's not what I'm after. I don't want the riders to look stupid, but I do think that the race organisers have a right to set the course that they want. And whilst Nick Schultz there makes a very valid point that by having a wall at the end of a rolling time trial, they are more or less forcing the riders to swap bikes, and that's a fair point. I also think that this being something that happens pretty infrequently is also fair enough. I mean, we've had the same debate over the years about whether or not gravelly sections are gimmicky, and the riders are fearful that a missed time puncture on a gravel section, which is basically put in for the spectators' enjoyment and to make the whole thing more exciting. I'm sympathetic to that too, but I think that the Grand Tours are a test of a range of different skills and a range of different terrains, and so I think it's not. I don't like seeing them running in cycling shoes. Well, you said to me this morning when we chatted about this that the next thing they'll be doing is wearing sort of triathlon outfits and painting their race numbers on their thighs. I mean,
well, you could have a little bit of cross. You could have a little bit of cross country as well. Finish in the forest with the guys running with the bikes on their backs.
But then, we'll just win everything.
Maybe have to burrow through some kind of tunnel, climb over a wall, jump through a hoop, and then get on their road bikes. Brilliant!
You're not thinking laterally enough.
Think of the spectators.
Some kind of tightrope. Unicycling, a unicycle stage. No, I mean, come on. I'm not advocating an obstacle course, but I mean, I just don't think it's that extreme. And also, if we didn't hear too many complaints from the riders, and I suppose even Nick Schultz didn't really complain. He didn't say I don't think there's any place for it whatsoever in the sport. I do understand that it's not comfortable. And we wouldn't want the Vuelta to be decided because Primož Roglič has slipped and fallen over and lost time trying to change his bike quickly. But by the same token, no one's actually forcing him to swap bikes. So.
Well, it adds, in a way, the thing is, it adds a little bit of excitement, like in Formula One, when they refill their tanks, and so it's also a test of the mechanics skills. And as we saw yesterday, I mean, the Movistar were by far the best with Enric Mas and by far the worst with the others. So it's interesting to see how the mechanics are doing. Maybe now.
Do you think Movistar were Enric Mas had a bit of a shocker? You think what the bike change was good?
I think Enric Mas. I mean, his result in the time trial was not good, but the bike change was great.
On the hoof,
he left it exactly where he decided to leave it, and then the bike came from the roof, smoothly. I think the bike change was Enric Mas' bike change was great.
It's the mechanics I feel most sorry for. It's one of them's going to have a heart attack, and that'll be the end of that.
Oh dear.
Oh well.
The Cycling Podcast is supported by Science in Sport. Science in Sport. Fueled by science.
Thank you very much indeed to Science and Sport for their support of the Cycling Podcast. If you want 25% off all your Science and Sport products, as of course you do, go to scienceandsport.com and enter the code SISCP25 at the checkout. Now, as part of our relationship with Science and Sport, we have been putting your questions to their Director of Performance Solutions, James Morton. He's also Professor of Exercise, Metabolism and Nutrition at Liverpool John Moores University and has worked with Team Sky and Team Ineos and Liverpool Football Club. If you have a question for James, email us, contact@thecyclingpodcast.com, and I'll be putting more of your questions to him in the coming weeks and months. So Graham Tough writes for James Morton at Science and Sport. A number of the podcast team have had notable birthdays recently. I too am now 40 and find myself falling into the veteran age categories. As someone getting back to racing after a decade out, I find myself wondering if there are any additional nutritional considerations we should have as we get older. Do older athletes have different needs to those who come behind us, both in years and I hope in future races? Supplemental, do these apply to both race scenarios and everyday or weekly long rides? That's Graham Tough. Well, what about us oldies, James?
Well, I'm 38 myself, Rich, so I'll be hitting the big
4-0
soon. Yeah, great question, Graham. This is actually quite an interesting research area at the minute. There's lots of studies coming out recently on nutrition for masters athletes, but also just nutrition for the aging process. And probably the biggest thing that older people need to pay attention to is protein, actually. And what we now know is that older individuals require more protein than younger individuals to almost achieve the same response. So whereas a 20-gram protein serving in a young individual might induce a nice response, for a 40, 50, 60-year-old, you might have to increase that to 30, 40, or 50 grams serving of protein. So I think the biggest take-home message and that a real simple tip that we could all pay particular attention to is just how much protein are we consuming after our rides. And I would definitely recommend increasing that to at least 30 grams every time. And hopefully that will help you recover better. And I guess perhaps the more alarming thing is that as we get older, we lose muscle mass. And one of the reasons being actually is not just lack of exercise, but we also don't eat enough protein. So that's a real simple message that hopefully you can take away, Graham.
Oh, that's nice, isn't it? That transports me back to a French summer and the Tour de France, hopefully in July next year, June and July. The route was announced on Sunday night. How long did it take you to come up with the route, François? No, we'll talk to François about the route in a moment, but I think you've got some headlines from it, Lionel.
Well, yeah, the Tour de France in brief for 2021. The first 4 days are...
In brief? Where's brief?
No, sorry, Brest.
Do you mean brief?
Starting in Brest, not brief. It's a celebration of Brittany, the opening 4 days, and the opening weekend is one for the punchy climbers. An uphill finish on day 1 and a couple of climbs of Mur de Bretagne on day 2. So could we see Julian Alaphilippe in yellow again? It's a good race for the sprinters. As many as 8 could theoretically end in sprint finishes, although having said that, Carcassonne has not often, if ever, finished in a sprint. There's a 27-kilometre time trial in the middle of the first week. My birthday dinner will be in Châteauroux, so let's get booking a decent restaurant there. Sorry, Lionel. That's not great, is it? Is it not a centre of gastronomy?
Well, we'll discuss it later.
So Buffalo Grill for my birthday, fine. I'm actually okay with that. Stage 7 is 248 kilometres long, the longest tour stage since the year 2000, when they went 249.5 kilometres from Draguignan to Briançon over the Izoard. You may remember Santiago Botero won that day in 7 hours 56 minutes. Probably won't be quite as long as that this time because it's a flattish one. There's a finish in Tignes, making up for the stage that was cancelled in 2019 because of the hailstones. And the most eye-catching thing, probably 2 climbs of Mont Ventoux, first from Salt and then from Bédouin, with a descent to the finish in Malocène. A rest day in Andorra, once again, sorry for me there, not my favourite place in the world. Very tricky and varied stages in and around the Pyrenees, and the most eye-catching one to me anyway goes over the Tourmalet and up to Luzard-Diden, and then on the penultimate day, a 31-kilometre wine trial to Saint-Emilion, and then of course Paris to finish. So a pretty varied Tour de France route.
Yeah, the time trialling jumps out a bit, doesn't it? It's quite a lot of time trialling relative to recent years, and Tom Dumoulin, Chris Froome, if he could become competitive again, might look at that. But what do you make of it, François? As Lionel says, the double ascent of Mont Ventoux, very eye catching as well. But it's a reasonably traditional looking route, isn't it?
It's more than reasonably traditional. It's probably the most traditional tour route I've seen for 15 years. It's very, very classic. It's Jean-Marie Leblanc terrain. You should have instead of accordion, you should have played the clarinet like Jean-Marie Leblanc used to do. I mean, yeah, you've got, as you said, lots of sprints. The beginning in Brittany, obviously designed for Julien Alaphilippe to take the yellow jersey and keep it at least up to the Alps, and hopefully, I guess,
at least until he takes an illegal feed.
Yeah, unless he does, yeah. But I mean, it's all obviously made for Alaphilippe to wear the jersey as long as he can. Maybe the Ventoux, the Ventoux obviously is the big. And the first bit of the tour it could be, well, how could I put it? Could be really, really. It's never boring, but Tour Châteauroux, bloody hell, it's I mean, and worse than that, the 250 k's from Vierzon to Le Creusot. I was joking with a friend the other day. Nobody has ever, I think, ever in the history of France has ever traveled from Vierzon to Le Creusot, on purpose, because it's well. No, because really, Vierzon is a gloomy industrial, post-industrial town, and Le Creusot is a mining town. I mean, it's great. It's part of France. I'm not, undermining without, the interest of these places. But I mean, it's going to be long, in probably one of the less picturesque part of France. Well, and then it gets, for me, it gets into its real gear at Le Ventoux again. And so, two climbs of Le Ventoux and the finishing the descent in Malocène. I remember a stage of the Dauphiné some 15 years ago, going down from Le Ventoux and finishing in, I think it was finishing in Bédoin actually, but I mean, going up and down the Ventoux has been done before. I mean, maybe not twice and not in the Tour, but it'll be obviously the stage everybody is going to look forward to, and again, I mean, in the Pyrenees, pretty traditional. We're going up to Tourmalet, Luzardiden, we've been there before, and the finish up. The only thing missing for a really classic tour, it would have been a sprint finish in Bordeaux. But I mean, it's all there. We're going to Pau. We've got to wind the final individual time trial, which is also back to Jean-Marie's days. So yeah, probably the most, as I said, the most traditional tour I've seen for 15 years.
Point of order, though, Francois, Tour to Châteauroux will actually be the most exciting day of the race.
It's quite possible, and I'm sure.
For other reasons.
And I'm sure we'll find a great restaurant in Châteauroux as well, because there you can always find some. But on paper, it's not very exciting. But we'll
all the more time for eating. We'll be able to buy a nice pan as a birthday present the following day as well, Lionel.
That's Le Creuset. That's Le Creuset. Slightly
a
different.
Nice casserole dish.
That's from somewhere slightly different. But no, I'm expecting a good meal in Châteauroux, and hopefully a lovely quiet day. Really fast, 144 kilometre stage on my birthday. Nice early finish. That would be good. But that stage to Le Creusot, 248 kilometres on a Friday. It's a traditional. We had a couple, didn't we? The Dylan Groenewegen stages, where it was getting on for sort of 20 past, 6:30 by the time they crossed the line. It could be a snoozy Friday. One to go and get our laundry done on that Friday, maybe before pushing on into the Alps. I do like the look of those Alpine stages, though. A couple of Alpine stages, and then obviously. The Mont Ventoux one, I love Mont Ventoux anyway, and to go up it twice, and also to come from that direction from Salt. I mean, it's a lot longer, but it's a gentle run into the famous bit from Chalet Reynard, the 6.5 or whatever it is kilometres from there up to the summit. But that will be a festival for people who enjoy seeing racing on Mont Ventoux. The only bit I'd change would be the rest day in Andorra. Maybe I'll see if we can stay over the border either in Spain or France instead.
I know a great I know a great hotel in Andorra, not far from the Pas de la Case. So I'll keep you posted on that.
I guess obviously the Copenhagen start has been shifted for various reasons. The tour starts quite early again next year because of the European Football Championship being rearranged for next year. I suppose I expected, given all the uncertainty that's still likely to be in place next year, that this tour would be entirely within the French borders, and it does go into Andorra, which might be a slight risk, and might be subject to change at some point. Who knows?
Well, especially as Andorra, I remember you saying, Rich, after speaking to some riders. Well, I think we did speak to some riders. Andorra had a really strict lockdown, didn't they? The first time
Very.
Around. So, yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. I expected it to be entirely on French soil, and it isn't quite. But it's we we hope that it all comes off and that that it happens when it's supposed to happen, obviously, which didn't happen this year.
I'm also surprised by the length of time trials, because I know, because I discussed that with Christian Prudhomme a couple of times. He doesn't like time trials, so the fact that he put 2 in this one was probably, I think it went a little bit against his nature, Christian, by on designing this tour. The fewer tourist, spectacular tourist sites than in the past. He's back. Maybe as well. I mean, this is something they will never tell you. But even in Brittany, if you take Redon, Fougères, Pontivy, they're not the nicest places in Brittany as well. And as we know, Rennes, which is the capital of Brittany, refused to hold the tour for environmental reasons. So they might have had problems as well of of that order. Remember the last tour, a couple of towns and cities said the tour was not unwelcome, but at least was not really keen on holding the tour. So maybe that's why the organizers got back to the tradition, because it's safer to do it this way, I guess, in a trouble period.
We have, on the other hand, got Le Grand Bornand, very lovely. Malocène, nice. Nîmes, lovely. Carcassonne, very nice as well. So and those stages in the Pyrenees. So some nice places as well.
And Saint-Emilion, of course.
Carcassonne is good for Cassoulet, so that's a win for me. I was just going to mention, François, you made the point there about the organisers kicking off with these 2 hilly stages, hilly finishes anyway, and how that does definitely suit Julien Alaphilippe, who is, he's the most charismatic of the riders that France has at the moment, and of course he's had the yellow jersey the last 2 years in the Tour, and now normally we would assume that the Tour route is all plotted and more or less done and dusted well in advance, and we always sort of say that 1 year's Tour route is not necessarily an immediate reaction to what has happened in the previous year. But in this case, of course, they had a second go at the start, because of course it would have been Copenhagen, but for various reasons, as you say, Rich, the dates don't work for Copenhagen because they'll be hosting some European football if all is well. But either way, the coronavirus situation does make a transfer from Denmark to France risky anyway. So they have had a chance to redraw the opening few days of the Tour, and with the Brittany start, they've been given the opportunity to make it suit Julien Alaphilippe, and they've taken that opportunity, which is quite interesting.
No, it's absolutely made for Mark Hershey. I mean, he could hold the yellow jersey for several days.
You're right, of course. Alaphilippe will be the veteran, the fading force by next June.
Fading force.
Who knows?
Yeah, we should be looking for 20-year-olds to win this. I mean, if the trend goes on. But
well, we'll be back on the Vuelta tomorrow, won't we? Maybe expecting a slightly similar stage. Nick Schultz earlier on noted its length and that there could be a headwind. I should mention as well, while the GC battle kind of goes on the back burner a little bit, we think, over these couple of days, that today we released Life in the Peloton, the latest episode with Hugh Carthy, Mitch Docker in conversation with Hugh Carthy. And I had listened to it while I was on my turbo trainer this afternoon, and it's absolutely brilliant. Hugh Carthy I interviewed him a lot at the Giro last year, and you could tell there's quite a lot going on there, but he is quite reluctant to open up in those kind of situations before and after races, especially with people he doesn't maybe know all that well. It's funny, I spoke to Mark Donovan the other day, the young rider at Sunweb, and we may hear from him this week, but he trains a lot with Hugh Carthy and said that, he's actually very, very funny and talks a lot in that kind of situation. But yeah, he doesn't give a lot away in interviews, and it has quite a dry, sardonic kind of wit about him. But really, really interesting chat with Mitch Docker. His telling of how he won on the Angliru on Sunday is brilliant and really takes you back to that climb. And how it all unfolded and how he won the stage. It's a great listen. So I'm sure many of you will have listened or will be listening. But if you're undecided, give it a listen.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. Really warmed to Hugh Carthy and found out a lot about him. I mean, not just talking about the cycling. There was a great section on butter pies, which I particularly enjoyed.
And learning Spanish and the importance of speaking Spanish, and that he would have perhaps been a teacher had he not been a cyclist, which I found really interesting, because I could imagine being a very good teacher. He would have had the little earring, wouldn't he, as a teacher as well, and he'd be kind of cool in an ironic way, in an uncool way. He'd be a cool teacher, and somebody who you'd be slightly scared of, I think, because he'd be very straight talking.
And just a word for Mitch as well, because he really got the best. I mean, they're teammates, and it must be odd to. It's not an interview. It's a conversation, but it's a conversation that's for the public to listen to. So it's.
Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. That's what it is.
Well, that's what.
Yeah, that's right.
That's what a podcast.
That's brilliant. It's a podcast. It's a podcast.
Yeah, but what I mean is they're not talking privately, and
definitely.
But he's.
No, they definitely recorded it. So I listened to it earlier.
Oh dear. The point I'm making, Richard, if you could stop being quite so obtuse, is that I thought that their kind of natural friendship came across as well, but there was also a little bit of peeling away of the layers by Mitch too. I really enjoyed it. Good stuff.
Yeah. Have a listen to Mr. Carthy on the Life in the Peloton podcast. It's a great listen, and a reminder that if you want to send in a question for any of us for the press conference episode, please email contact@thecyclingpodcast.com, and go to thecyclingpodcast.com if you'd like to buy either our book, The Grand Tour Diaries, or one of our beautiful cycling jerseys, cycling podcast jerseys. They're limited sizes left, unfortunately, aren't there, Lionel?
There are, yes. Men's medium, men's large are in good stock. Men's small as well in good stock. Other sizes less good stock. I think we've got some women's small and women's extra small. But when you go to our shop at thecyclingpodcast.com, it will tell you which sizes are available. So if you can select it, we've got it in stock, and we're posting them out, even though we're about to go into lockdown here in the UK. So if you order one, you should get it in a few days.
Well, thank you very much, Lionel. We'll be back tomorrow night with more of Vuelta chat.
Thank you, Richard.
And thank you to you, Francois, and you'll be joining us again tomorrow evening, I believe.
Yes, I'm back tomorrow, absolutely.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you.